Open source is dead. That's the kind of statement you would see online on social media by some wannabe token maxing influencers. I'm here to debunk that because I have a lot of opposite thoughts about this, obviously. But first, hi, my name is François Best. I'm a freelance software engineer and consultant from Grenoble in the French Alps. My job is to help teams ship faster by reducing their technical debt and migrating from legacy technologies to more modern and more performant ones. These days, that involves a lot working with AI, obviously, which is fun because everything changes every couple of days. So that keeps me on the edge for my job, which is cool. And I'm also an open source web developer. I've been building open source for the last 20 years now. The most recent project that I built is Nux. It's a state management library for React that lives in the URL. So set state in React, but lives in your URL. Handy for sharing state. I presented that actually 2 years ago in Forkit. So thanks for having me again. Can we have a round of applause for the Forkit team, please? Thank you. And so I've been building other libraries over time. The few other more that can be notable is Prisma field encryption to encrypt some of the data in your database so that your backups, your logs, and the intern that still somehow has access to the prod database after 2 years don't see anything sensitive. Only your application can decrypt that data. And Actions Clever Cloud to deploy your web applications on Clever Cloud. Quentin will talk about Clever Clouds this afternoon through GitHub Actions. And so you can find my work on GitHub at Frankie47. So the main question is, open source is dead because we now have this magic sentient text boxes in our terminals that can do whatever we need. So do we even need open source to install dependencies from others when we can just ask our agents to code whatever we need? And sometimes we don't even ask them. They just do it by themselves. So do we really need to have dependencies upon some of other people's work? And it comes down to this question we ask ourselves: do we depend on someone else's work, or do we vendor it? Do we copy paste? Before it was that. Now we ask the agent to implement a bespoke solution for the particular problem that we have into our code base, and we keep it for ourselves. It depends. That's the standard answer for every question in tech. And it depends on different factors because not all open source is equal. I'm going to take one end of this spectrum, this library on NPM called isOdd, which checks if a number is not divisible by 2. Yes, there is a library like this on NPM. And yes, it has 500,000 weekly downloads. And yes, it weighs 16 kilobytes on your drive. And yes, it depends on an outdated isNumber library. And yes, it can be replaced with 6 characters of JavaScript. The NPM ecosystem, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. So this is one end of the spectrum. If AI can delete all of that, I'm happy, literally happy that this can disappear. So on this spectrum of complexity, on one end, we have isOdd. On the other hand, we have something extremely more complex, say the Linux kernel. I don't know about you, but I would not slop fork Linux and use it on my main machine for serious work. If that's your idea of fun, perfect. But you would not use this for serious work in production. So deciding whether to vendor or to depends on a lot of different characters. The project size is one, we just saw, but also the quality of the existing solutions. I'm going to take an example because I do React front-end mostly. When you ask an agent to fetch some data from some URL, they will generally do this. They will do a fetch in use effect, because this is the pattern that has been documented on every blog post for the last 10 years. And obviously the LLMs have trained on that. And so they are very happy to use just the React APIs to do the minimal thing possible. But there's a lot of things that can go wrong with this. What happens if during the request is in progress, you unmount the component by moving to another page? What happens when there's an error? What happens when your network connection fails? What happens when you want to revalidate that thing? There's so many edge, I won't even call them edge cases. They're just normal cases of working with HTTP. And fortunately, there are libraries that have solved this problem much better than LLMs can, like TanStack Query, for example, which I recommend if you do front-end. And fortunately, now LLMs kind of recommend that patterns because they've trained on the best practices of using these tools. But the thing to remember is that libraries are production tested. They have gone through all these layers of little edge cases, finding problems and implementing solutions that are tested against. And so this is the quality gate that you want to buy in by depending on other people's code. Another question is the niche problem. For example, you probably do not want to manage a client-side cache for your fetch calls locally in your own application when there are other solutions that do it much better. If you want to do URL states, don't necessarily re-implement everything. Use Nux. So you have your application has some business logic that is dedicated to your domain, and you don't necessarily want to pollute it with a lot of unnecessary and orthogonal stuff that you need to take care of. Because vendoring creates a maintenance cost. If you import in your code base code that is not relevant to your business logic, that just happens to be there to make things work, then you have to maintain it yourself. And sometimes it's better to delegate that maintenance to other people. Because that vendoring effect has an impact on context management. Context management, we mostly talk about it in the case of agents. That's if they have to think about this extra code that they generated and that not been trained on, so they don't necessarily know how to use and they will hallucinate on, that's a problem. But think about the humans that are still working on the database, on the code base. The humans, you would not inflict to your colleagues a vibe-coded slop fork of 10-stack query because that would not pass code review. So you have to think about not only the context of the agents, but also our context in our brains, because we want to focus only on our business logic to ship our apps faster. And for that, we need to rely on a bedrock of solid open source libraries. Now, when we talk about agents, we need to think about how they work. We have the LLM somewhere in the loop, but we have this loop, and this loop goes both ways. We need the agent to be able to write code, but it needs to be able to validate its code that it wrote. And for this, it needs tools. This is part of the agentic loop. This is what makes it a loop, this feedback loop. And this loop needs to be deterministic. We cannot use the malleability and non-determinism of LLMs to check its own work. We can do it a little bit, but we can't rely on it. That's the problem. And those deterministic tools generally are open source. Like a few that I always use, the TypeScript compiler, to check that the contracts between the moving parts of my applications are correct. vtest for unit testing my code. Knip is one that you might not know. It's a tool that checks for dead code in your application, because LLMs love writing code, but they never clean up after themselves, and they tend to over-export things just in case. Knip will find that and will tell you, you can delete 10,000 lines from your application. And trust me, it's a good feeling when you open a PR and you delete 10,000 lines. It's really fun. And then we have OXLint for linting and OXFormat for formatting. All these tools are very, very fast, and they help keeping this agentic loop fast and give you better results. And they are open source. I would not dream ever at any point replacing those with any LLM bespoke implementation in my code bases. So open source is not dead yet, but I'm going to leave you suspending while I drink water. It's not dead, but open source is under attack. We've seen this every single week. One supply chain attack every single week. Mainly coming from the NPM ecosystem, this thing again. So much so that they should change their logo, I think. To that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that one went well on social media. NPM is not the main offender, though. It has a partner in crime, which is GitHub Actions. Generally, the vectors of vulnerability have always been the same. Like a malware gets published as a package on NPM, which runs in some sort of GitHub Actions workflow, which steals some tokens, help ship another NPM package that's contained malware. This is the Shai-Hulud worm that this propagates through Abyss. Now, it would be great in the ideal of world if GitHub and NPM could work together on this thing. In the ideal of world, they would even be part of the same company, right? Oh, wait, they are. It's Microsoft. So Microsoft should probably do a bit more about this, I think. If we look at the timeline, just for the last 3 months alone, Axios, which is Again, a library that does fetch. We've had native fetch in JavaScript in every single runtime for the last 2 years. We don't need Axios anymore. We can replace that. And it's stupidly big as well. Bitwarden and CLI, that one is tricky because it deals with secrets. So if you start pawning the infrastructure where all your secrets live, you're kind of screwed. But the one that really scared me was the TanStack one. So to give you an idea of how this one works, the maintainer, a contributor, someone from the outside, opened the pull requests, closed it instantly, and just by doing that was able to poison the cache of the GitHub Actions runners in order for a legitimate deploy by the TanStack team later to be able to reuse that cache, poison the workflow at a state that they could not see, and it would steal the tokens and then publish malware on top of the existing publishing of the legitimate packages that they did for that release. So it was completely transparent for the TanStack team. They just saw a pull request opened and closed instantly and just didn't think too much of it because they received 10,000 of them every day. So this is scary because we don't have the tools to defend ourselves because we don't have the tools to visualize what's wrong. So much so that in my case for Nux, I decided temporarily to close pull requests from external contributors because we don't know yet what is going to be the next pattern, and we need to have better layers of defense for this. It's coming, and we're going to talk about this now, actually. Defense against the dark arts 101 for NPM packages. What can you do today to defend yourself and your supply chain when you install packages from NPM? First off, use a modern package manager. PNPM 11 ships with great defaults for security. NPM 12 will ship in a couple of weeks, if not months, with the same kind of defaults, which are no running install scripts by default, which is how malware propagates. Install scripts is something that runs right after you install the package, and this is how they generally have code execution on your machine or on your CI/CD. Minimum age helps give you a window during which between the deployment of the package and you running the install phase, it will not take anything that's inside the window. So it waits for the package to be old enough to be able to be installed. That helps because there are scanners like socket.dev or SNCC that run against the NPM registry and will analyze all these packages for vulnerabilities. And when they find them, generally within 1 hour or two, they will contact the authors, they will contact the NPM registry and just yank the package out of there. So by having this window, it guarantees that you have enough time to let these scanners do their work before it lands on your machines. Now, there's a problem with mean age, though, is you still have to account for security vulnerabilities. If you take, for example, the Next.js RSC vulnerabilities that we've all seen the last couple of weeks, up till December, I think the first one was, we need to be able to install those extremely quickly. So you have to have overrides for security dependency installs. And so unfortunately, you're now left with a trade-off of you install a package, you get pwned, or you don't install a package, you get pwned. You know the meme with the 2 red buttons? I didn't have time to put it in there, but that's basically the idea that we have here. So what can you do otherwise? You can install the socket firewall. I talked about socket.dev. It's essentially that. It allows you, when you install a package on your machine, it asks the socket registry of malware detection, everything, is this safe? And if it is, transparent. Otherwise, it just blocks the install. So it's a little wrapper CLI SFW that's free, where you can put around a lot of different package managers, not just PNPM. It works for not only JavaScript, but also Python, Ruby, Rust, maybe Go, I'm not sure. A few languages for the web that allows you to be secure when you install packages. So those two are mainly for consuming packages as a consumer. What about me who deploys packages? There is this new idea that has shipped recently that's called stage publishing in NPM. Instead of publishing straight to the registry, you publish into a temporary staging area where your package is held while you can review it. You can have those tools potentially review it for malware. And you need 2-factor authentication to gate it out into the world. So that helps a little bit in the sense that you can configure your packages to only go through this staging area, like a direct publish to the registry would not work. And there is a lot of tooling still to be built around all these things for automatic scanning and have some better signals flowing back and forth through the deployment process. But it's already a good step, I think, in the right direction. So while I was saying Microsoft doesn't do anything, that's not true. They actually have done some efforts, like to revoke all the tokens in NPM, the long-lived tokens, push out provenance in order to have some idea that it didn't come from some random person's machine, but literally came from GitHub Actions, which doesn't help because you just pawn the GitHub Action instead. But yeah, stage publishing is currently the last line of defense we have. And then we have a lot of tools to analyze our GitHub Action workflows. Zismer and action lints are linters for GitHub Actions.yaml workflows. They will deterministically be able to tell you what's going on. Pinact is very handy for pinning your users and GitHub repo to a SHA-1 Git commit, because those are immutable and are guaranteed to never change. If you pin at 1.2.3 at a version, for example, or at a branch, those move. Git tags can be moved. And so you want to pin your dependencies in GitHub Actions to a Git SHA-1. That's the closest thing we have to a log file. I have actually I've wrapped into a skill that you can load in your agents that you can scan if you want. What it does is it will run these tools, those three tools, Zismer, Action Lints, and Pinact, to make sure deterministically that it has some grounding in reality, and use the malleability of LLMs to be able to think like an attacker and try and traverse your workflows against the pattern that it already knows. So it can't really think about new patterns because we're not doing offense, obviously. And if I ask Claude to do that, I don't have access to Mythos, so it would just block me. So unfortunately, we do with what we had. But these are good uses of AI in OSS. So let's talk about those. The best use case that I have, particularly for AI, is reproductions. There is something that I love when someone opens an issue, is give me a minimal reproduction repo. Give me some context on how to reproduce the issue that you opened. Otherwise, I will have to mark it cannot reproduce, and I can't prove that the problem that you have is actually a real one. More so, I use these things for TDD, test-driven development. If you prove that something doesn't work, I can turn that into a test. That test fails, I have proved that there is a problem, I can implement a solution, and then that test passes, it proves that I fixed the right problem. So TDD is a great thing to work with agents as well, but we haven't invented anything. This is like ages old. So reproductions. And a lot of people ask me how to contribute to open source. Let me just give you the 5 steps. It's quite easy. First one, use open source in your project. You're already doing this. You don't have to do this explicitly. You're using open source without whether you know it or not. Find a problem. That's the same. You'll probably find problems without having to think too hard about them. And then this is where the work starts. Isolating that problem into a minimal reproduction repository. Minimal meaning the least amount of code you need to accurately represent just that problem and not the rest of your application. I don't want to have to set up 5 different services to replicate something that is just a React bug, Once you've done that, open an issue with that repro link, because you have now the way to point to something that I can test against. And if you want to go the extra mile, be willing to work on it. That makes you a great open source contributor. That repro skill essentially tells the agent how to do this step, how to reduce from a template to find the information it needs to reproduce the issue that you have, quizzes you on how to do it, and then iterates until it has this minimal reproduction system that it can then push to a repo and link in a new issue. Another good use of AI that I use it for is code review. On demand, I always trigger those code reviews by hand because they can be very noisy on code that either I wrote, and I can run the code review locally before I push. But also, many times is just you changed, you centered a div. I don't need CodeRabbit to run and spend so many tokens to show me that the div has moved. I can just look at it in the preview build. So In many cases, code review can be noisy. This is why I like triggering it manually. Another use case is triage. A thing that I used to do a lot by hand is looking for issues, finding related discussions across the repo, and trying to link them together. When someone posted a comment, was like, yes, we discussed that here, and finding the here took a long time. Now with AI, it's a bit easier because you can tell them, well, we thought about something, we discussed that thing, where is it? Find me some links, and then I can craft the issue myself, the reply myself. Suggesting labels is another thing that people say. I haven't really found a good use case for it. I use mostly milestones for automation, but suggesting them when you open a pull request can be useful. A good use case as well is onboarding. When you want to contribute to a new open source repository, just let your agent, you clone it locally first, and then you let your agent discover the repo. You let it go wild on it, and then together, you and the agent, you learn about how the architecture of that repository is laid out, where things are, how the moving parts are architected together. You can ask questions. You can literally chat with your code base with these things. And there is this Grill Me skill by Matt Pocock that I use a lot, not just for discovery, but also for planning out work. And then AI has been really helpful for the side quests, because open source is not just about the little bit of library that we ship, that little code here. It's also about the documentation, about the change logs, about the maintenance of the issues, the triage, and all these things. All these side quests, like Bash, I don't want to run a single line of Bash in my head by hand anymore. I just ask the agent to do it if I have a little script to write. And so there is this meme by the maintainer of TenStack AI, a friend of mine, who just went all in on agentic coding. Initially, we had both the same reactions, like, yeah, for OSS, I don't know if it makes a lot of sense. But then you start seeing the good sides of it for the edge cases. Not necessarily the core, but at least the edge cases. Now, there are still a lot of bad uses of AI in OSS. And we need to talk about that 4-letter word. Slop. AI slop everywhere. My God, there's so much of slop everywhere. If you want a personal horror story for this, because those are always fun, in one issue, someone commented, not their issue, someone commented on someone else's issue, their entire chat history, this is how we solved the problem with Claude. 10,000 lines of reasoning from Claude, with at the end, the problem is inconclusive. Why? Why do we need this? This is spam. I'm sorry, but this is spam. So yeah, don't do that. Another problem is the drive-by PRs. If you see that number, you might know which one that is. That's the rewrite of Bun in Rust recently. That's, yeah. Who is going to review 1 million lines of code? It doesn't even fit in a context window for an agent. So yeah, no, don't do that. Do smaller PRs, stack them together, try and isolate logic layers out of each other. But yeah, like this is cognitive overload. And Sebastian Lorber, the creator of Docusaurus, he uses like GitHub issues for just tracking ideas and tracking out work that he wants to do. And for every issue that he opens, he gets like a few hundred vibe-coded PRs from people that have no idea about what they're doing because they just don't care. They've just seen on some YouTube video that you should contribute to open source and add your name to that README. No, contributing to open source means intent. You want to solve something. You want to make it better. You just don't want to contribute to open source for the social credit. And we're just talking about social credit here. Now, when money is involved, sorry for the flashbang, that's another problem. Daniel Sternberg, the creator of curl, the library that fetches everything everywhere, had to stop his bug bounty because of low-quality slop vulnerability reports. And that's a shame because now that we don't have ways for legitimate white hat hackers to try and find vulnerabilities in the program, they can't get paid for that anymore. So it's a net negative for everybody. Overall, this is an amplified denial of attention, and we already don't have a lot of attention available for us. That's just inconveniences. It gets worse when it starts getting into real threats. We had the maintainer of Matplotlib gets literally a threat piece wrote by an AI, an OpenClaw instance, against them for them to pressure them into merging their changes. This is getting insane. We all know this meme. The maintainers are really this small piece that we need to take care of. But you might not know the alt text for this image. Someday, image magic will finally break for good, and we'll have a long period of scrambling as we try to reassemble civilization from the rubble. Yeah, replace image magic by any big architectural project that uses AI a lot, and you see how we might get there. And finally, we need to talk about the social aspects of open source. Because open source is not about code. Open source is about people. Open source is a graph of contributors, sponsors, and all the people around the ecosystem that come together to try and improve some projects to make it better for the greater good. And when we start introducing AI in the mix, we have this problem that our agents are literally in the middle of us trying to talk, and we see the effects of those in, for example, the downloads for Nox keep going up, but the traffic to the docs keeps going down. And the discussions from people on the issues and comments and everything also keeps going down. We see agents being in the middle of people, and so they don't give that feedback loop. They can go read the docs if they need something. They can go read the issues, but agents don't say thank you. They don't say, hey, by the way, I can contribute to that. No. We saw the same problem with Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow became completely irrelevant when people could just ask the agent the question. Or ChatGPT, by the way, because that's where I started. And we saw that problem as well with Tailwind CSS in January, when Adam had to lay off 3/4 of his team just because the traffic to the docs had completely collapsed and it was no longer a viable option for him to sustain his team through sponsors on the docs. Because that was started even at 2023, because ChatGPT was good enough to answer questions about how to use Tailwind. So you didn't really have to go to the docs, and so you didn't see the sponsors, and so you didn't have this feedback loop that worked. And so I have this quote that I keep saying is the clankers can have the code, but I want to keep my friends. I want to keep the social graph of people that I met through conferences, through open source. And yeah, it's worth reinforcing this. Open source is not about code. Open source is about people. And this is the reason, personally, that I do this. For people. Thank you.